Hi everybody, it's John back with another model inbox review, and you must be thinking, what on earth is that a picture of? Well, from guys who live in the United Kingdom, and girls for that matter, because I know there's a lot of female modelers out there in the world, this might be a familiar sight, even though you're racking your brains as to what it was. This is actually the site of the raising of Henry VIII's flagship, the Mary Rose, from the Solent in 1982. And it was raised by the Mary Rose Trust. And the model I'm actually going to be doing an inbox review on is the Airfix starter kit of the 1/400th scale Mary Rose. And the boxing history is not going to take very long at all, because it was only ever released in one guise, and that's this one. The starter kit comprises of 4 acrylic paints, a paintbrush and some cement, and a rather interesting model inside the box. The kit was actually sponsored by the Mary Rose Trust, and I do believe that they contributed some money into the Airfix Development Fund for building and developing and designing this model, because originally it was solely to be sold in the Mary Rose Trust shop in Portsmouth, in the Maritime Museum at Portsmouth, for the Mary Rose ship. And then Airfix decided to sell a number of these ships through limited outlets and off the website, the Airfix website online. The kit itself is no longer in production at the moment, but I do think they still have plans to reinstigate another production run, probably because there's plenty of stock in the Mary Rose Trust shop at the museum. But the thing, I don't normally buy, I have had a couple of builds of Airfix small-scale sailing ships, but I don't normally buy them per se. I prefer the more modern warships, but I do sometimes have a bash at some of these types of ships because I find them very interesting builds, and they're actually more fun than they appear. And I did manage to get hold of this kit quite cheaply because it was sold in one of our local, what we call the cheapy outlet stores. It was actually bought from one of the Home Bargains chain stores up here near where I live. I think I paid about $2.99 for the kit. I don't think I paid much more, maybe $3.99. It wasn't much more than that, but it was about £2 or £3.99. And when I got the kit home and opened it up, because the first thing I do with these starter kits to fit them in the stash is I take the paint and accessories and paintbrush and all that stuff off the top of the box, cut it off, and then the kit sits in my stash just like a normal boxed kit. And I tend to use not the paints, but the glue and the brushes aren't too bad. Because the tube is quite small, you don't get the usual, oh my god, it's coming out like a river issue with the tubes, because they're quite small, they're quite easy to control the flow rate, and the brushes on these starter kits from Airfix are actually, they're quite good. They're quite good quality, and I like using these brushes. I use them quite a bit. So this was the first release and only release of the Mary Rose, and it has only ever been released as a starter set. It's never been released as a normal size box model kit that hasn't got a starter set attached to it. And it was released in 2014. Now there's a lot of speculation over this kit because a lot of people think that it could possibly be the start of a new style of sailing ship range by Airfix, but I haven't seen any more interest in different types of ships. But the thing that makes the Airfix Mary Rose very interesting is that the ship is actually a carrack. The carrack was born out of the old cob from many years ago, in medieval times. The ship known as the cog was a standard merchant ship that was often utilised as a military ship. But of course, before the days of Henry VIII, there was no Royal Navy, because Henry VIII founded the Royal Navy. He was the king that was in charge of Britain when the Royal Navy was founded. And the carrack as a ship is basically a cog with a gun deck and what's called a shelter deck, which also housed some guns. And the idea was that the ship's hull would have a forecastle. It was actually the first ship to carry what's called a proper built-up forecastle, which was designed to keep the water spray and waves of water coming over the bow in bad weather, and to protect the ship's crew and passengers when she was carrying passengers. Now, the Mary Rose never had a merchant career. She was never used as a cargo vessel in any way, shape or form. She was always a man of war. And she was Henry VIII's flagship until she was sunk in the Solent during his reign. But the carrack itself was basically a cog with three or four masts with square rigs to the forward two masts usually, and maybe one or two rear steering, or what were called outriggers, for a system of steering the ship called tacking. The thing about the carracks is that the carracks fell into a period of ship history where not an awful lot of different types of ships that constituted carracks, or cogs for that matter, were modelled by model companies. But there are a few, and I'm going to show you what they are so that you can see how really under-modelled companies have offered as carrack builds. Now, obviously, the Mary Rose from Airfix was the last carrack model released, but all of the others are ancient moulds. They're absolutely ancient. Some of them are from the 50s. But I just wanted to quickly show you what the options were, so that you could see them and how they relate to the Mary Rose in shape, because I think you'll find one of them in particular was quite shocking when I actually looked at it and realised, oh my God, it really is a carrack. I couldn't believe it. But anyway, I'll go through the options here quickly. The Mary Rose was the last release, and I'm just going to go through them in alphabetical order of manufacturers that build these kits, because it is quite interesting. The first option on offer was the Hella option of a carrack. Can you see how the ship has three masts? The forward two masts are square rigged and the back one is the tacking mast, and you have this forecastle at the front here, and this raised deck panel at the back here, and a separate gun deck. Can you see that? That is absolutely classic layout for a carrack. That's what carracks, that's how they looked. And the other interesting point is that the carrack was also the first ship that utilised an invention called the gun port in the ship's hull. This was the first time that guns could be poked through an aperture in the ship's hull, or an orifice, if you like, in the ship's hull, that could be shut to the elements, so that when the ship was not in battle in open sea, these gun ports were closed up. And the carrack was the first ship that this form of gun port was fitted to. It was an invention applied to carracks just prior to Henry VIII's reign. I think it was during Henry VII's reign. But they weren't an invention put in by Britain. They were an invention put in by the Spanish, and the British covered them and applied them to their ships, especially their warships when the Navy was founded. This ship is the La Grande Hermine, and it is built and moulded in 150th scale. It's quite a difficult kit to get a hold of now, but it's actually quite a nice model. The second option is the actual founder of several of the ships that were laid out by Pyro. The company is Lindbergh. And this particular kit, again, you can see the carrack line. There was no gun deck in this ship. The gun deck itself wasn't actually invented until the middle of the 1500s, whereas the Santa Catarina Portuguese man of war was actually a very early 1500s style ship. But she had the carrack line. Can you see how she had like the shelter deck here, the two forward masts, the twin tackers, and the forecastle at the front? She is classic carrack style hull and rigging setup, and this kit was released by Lindbergh in the early 50s. The Santa Catarina, the actual ship's name is actually the Santa Catarina do Monte Sinai. That's what the ship's actually called. This particular company, Pyro, also reboxed Lindbergh's original moulds for the Honorary Grace Adieu, which was a British man of war. Again, this was one of the ships that was released and put in commissioned, during the early days of the Royal Navy, and she was actually named after Henry VIII, Honorary Grace Adieu. And as I said before, this is actually an original Lindbergh release, but Pyro released it and reboxed it in the late 50s. So that's another option. The next option is a Spanish Galleon offering from Pyro. This is the one that I and ahed about whether it was actually a carrack at all, until I noticed that it does have a forecastle, although it doesn't reach all the way to the bow, and she has the classic carrack square-rigged 2 front masts and the twin tackers, and the ship definitely has a shelter deck, although it's not so apparent. But apparently this ship, the Emperor Charles V, was another Spanish carrack, and it actually has gun ports, but these gun ports are built into the shelter deck. This ship also has gun ports at the back. Here, can you see? That is a proper gun deck. So this is a full-blown man-of-war carrack style warship, probably of contemporary era to the Mary Rose. The Spanish galleon Emperor Charles V is released by Pyro. That again is a Lindbergh mould originally. Pyro also built a ship called the Venetian carrack. This ship is a very interesting one because it has a proper forecastle, it has a proper rear deck, it has the 2 main square-rigged masts and the 2 tacker masts, but it also has another new invention which was integrated on the Mary Rose. She had what's called anti-boarding nets, which were nets designed to hold up a boarding team whilst the occupants of the ship's hull shot them through the nets. Can you see on the shelter deck? The ship is actually covered there by an array of, it looks like a greenhouse, but they're actually anti-boarding nets. Interesting fact that. And also this Pyro kit is an old Lindbergh release, again released in the late 50s. Revell built, yes, and you are looking at a carrack. This is the Santa Maria. Revell released this kit in 1/90th scale, and it's probably one of the largest scale kits available of a sailing ship. But the kit itself is not that big. It's not as big as, say, some of the Airfix and other Revell models that are built as sailing ships. But the Santa Maria from Revell is actually a really nice kit. It's a nice finish overall kit itself, and the build is quite nice. I do fancy getting this one myself, but I haven't actually found it for the right price yet because I don't really fancy paying the price tag on it. But that's the Revell offering of the Santa Maria. And lastly, you have a Zvezda kit. Now, Zvezda built this kit in 1/100th scale, and this is a standalone kit as well, I believe. The Zvezda Conquistador's ship, the San Gabriel, was actually a Spanish galleon, and she was a proper carrack with a gun deck. She had everything going for her in terms of design and whatnot, but she had a slightly different line to the Mary Rose, but she was still a carrack. So that's basically all the options that are available as carrack ships, and you'll probably note that there aren't that many moulds, but I just wanted to show you what all of the different moulds were that were available. There is another mould available, but I'll show you that in the options and costs, because that is the Santa Maria from Airfix, which is one of the Zero series classic sailing ships. But I just want to now show you a photograph of what the Mary Rose looks like in the museum, because I always think, God, there's not much of it left, but in actual fact there is, and it gives you a pretty good idea of what the ship must have looked like. Most of the front of the ship is actually missing, but the keel is intact. The ship's main rear section to the hull and the hull below the waterline, apart from at the bow, is pretty much intact. And Airfix went off this particular slab of the ship that was left and raised out of the Solent, and it at present is in the Portsmouth Dock Maritime Museum for the Mary Rose Trust. And they went off this particular slab of wood, and also a lot of the line drawings and paintings to produce their model. And when you think about it, the thing you have to remember is that all the other Carrack kits, and indeed most of the sailing ships, apart from one or two that I can think of, like the Vasa and the Cutty Sark, the Constitution, and maybe a couple of other ships, that they are still in existence. But the Mary Rose is the only Carrack that they have anything solid to go on, which makes the Mary Rose kit from Airfix probably the most accurate in all. Probably, because you can't guarantee that. But it certainly is the most likely to be the most accurate kit, although there are a couple of issues with it, and we'll go through that in a minute when I show you the parts. So that's basically what's left of the ship. I just want to pull the camera around and turn your attention to what we are actually reviewing. We'll just pan the camera down here, and that should hold nicely for us. There we go. Can I just spin this around a little tiny bit more? Would be nice if I could. There we go. Now then, this is the kit that I've got to review. It originally had a section to the top here, because you would have had the full paint guide on the top with all the glues and the paint and everything on the top. But I always take these off so that they fit in my stash better. And the painting on the front is actually a painting of the ship that was painted during the time when she was actually in existence. And this painting really does exist, so it's not an impression as such. I mean, it is an impression because it's a painting, but it's not an impression as an artist impression of what she may have looked like. It's more of an artist rendition of what she did look like. So this is probably a pretty good view of the Mary Rose as could be remembered by anyone that was alive at the time. We'll just take out the parts and the bits and pieces. On the back of the box you've got a nice paint guide, and also there's a view there of the various decal applications, and we'll go through the decals in a minute because they are quite ornate. But that's the box you get. The instructions, and believe it or not, yeah, this kit comes with decals. We'll go through those in a minute, and that's the parts. What I'll do, I'll just take these out of the bag, put the bag down there, we'll put the parts down there, we'll put all this gumph down here because we'll go through that in a minute. Before we go through the instruction sheets, I just want to show you this also. This is a blast from the past that Airfix under Hornby ownership have brought back. This is the Airfix Modelers Club, a membership application form. What I found interesting about this form is that there is nowhere on it for you to write away and ask for a missing part. It's just purely a Airfix Club membership application form. I don't really know what the benefits of joining the Airfix Club, but I do remember that years and years and years ago it was free to join, and you got a little badge, and you got lots of other offers and things and bits and bobs for joining the Airfix Modelers Club. But the Airfix Club now is $7.99 to join, and I think it has a subscription fee, which is quite interesting. But when you join the club, you have access to what are called exclusive club edition kits. And I've seen quite a few of these on eBay, so they're not as exclusive to club members at all. A lot of the club members put these on eBay and sell them off as specials, but they're basically the same kits as you would buy normally in the shops, but with special decals to produce certain types of aircraft in that range. So yeah, interesting. The instruction leaflet. The instruction leaflet is typical modern Airfix. Predominantly black and white, but there's shades of red in it here and there. The red, black and white Airfix logo there is quite prominent, and the scale of the ship, construction and description, and there's the serial number, A55114. And then there's some information in different languages on the ship's history, and also some information there on a little bit about Airfix and the Mary Rose Trust and whatnot. And at the bottom you've got a little bit of information, best results, use surfaces which should be painted and made clean. Before parts are removed from the sprue, wash in warm water and soapy rinse and then dry thoroughly and blah 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 blah. Please note additional paints may sometimes be required. So that, yeah, you get a little bit of additional information, and then you open the page and you've got on the first page here you've got assembly instructions, which are in different languages again, and then you've got an assembly icon instruction list here. And a lot of these icons are not going to be used. I can't imagine the ship requiring weight. Yeah, interesting. Or options. And I can't imagine you'd need to build something twice, but you never know. But some of these icons obviously are like standard for all of the kits that they manufacture. Now the Mary Rose kit is actually made up in 13 sections. Can you see the 13th one there? So you've got 13 steps. And the Mary Rose kit appears to be an incredibly simple build, which didn't surprise me in the least, because all of their small-scale sailing ships are really, really easy to build, very simple. Some of them have fit issues, but not really very many of them. Most of the fit issues come with their larger scale sailing ships, but the small ones, I mean, I've built 2 or 3 of them and I never had any issues building them at all. And I find them quite enjoyable and quite a delight to put together. And I'm expecting this to be pretty much the same. But the thing I have noticed about this particular kit is the amount of detail, the quality of the detail, and we'll show you more of that on the sprues when we go through them, and the actual attention to detail that Airfix have gone to. And this is probably because they've got the real thing sat in the Solent, in the museum at Portsmouth to actually work off. But in section 1 you've got the upper deck and the shelter deck there, which is all one part B2, and then you've got several bits and pieces of detail and decking there to finish the deck off. And then section 2 you've got the gun deck. Can you see the gun deck there? Part B1, and the top deck, which is assembled from the first section, and half of the hull. The thing I find also interesting about this is that there are proper location lugs on the parts to show you exactly where these parts go, so that it's pretty idiot proof, which is nice. Section 3, the whole assembly is put together, and there's a separate stern section there. Can you see that at the back? And you'll want to look at that when I get the plastic bits out, because the hull on this kit is really detailed and it's beautifully moulded, and I'll show you in a minute. Section 4, 5, 6 and 7 are the 4 main masts and the tacking masks, and they're all in the order of appearance from bow to stern, built from section 4 to section 7. And then section 8 to section 11 is the application of those mast sails. The 2 forward ones are square rigged, the rear 2 are tacking rigs for steering the ship. We'll have a look at the parts in a minute, because I want to show you something about the parts. Yeah, the instructions give them a bit more benefit than what the actual parts do, but I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. Section 12 is the application of the mast and sails assembly to the main hull, and the rear rudder, the forward, I think it's called the mizzen mast. I'm not sure 100%. I can't remember what all the masts are called on these ships, but the forward rudder, the forward mast C2, and the rear, I think that's I don't honestly know what it is. It's some form of outrig that sticks out. Maybe it's like the bit that trims the sails, so that the sails can be rigged out to steer the ship properly. And section 13 is the stand. Now, anyone who's built some of the original stands from the original ships that came out in the Series Zero's range, they'll notice that the stand on this kit is exactly the same design. And I think Airfix have done that on purpose, because they wanted to integrate the ship with the other ships in the series, so that they can still sell them. But I think there's a lot of speculation that they might be introducing further models in this series in maybe 1/400 scale, but time will tell, because nothing's come out since 2014. That's the instructions, quite easy to follow. We'll first look at the flag sheet, because the flag sheet There's not a lot to it, but basically you've got a paper flag sheet, and this is very common, and it's very back to the days of when the other ships were originally designed and released. This is basically a piece of paper. These aren't transfers, these are paper flags, and basically you cut them out, you glue them together around the mast, and then you form them whilst the glue's drying into any shape you see fit. I used to do them bellowing in the wind, especially these long flags, and I used to do them bellowing in the wind facing forward so that the ship looked like it was sailing. And that's a nice touch that Airfix have gone back to that idea, because I quite like that. I'm not sure whether these are supposed to be pop out, peel off, or what, I'm not sure. Well, the instructions will probably show you a bit more for that. Now then, the decals. The decals on this ship are quite complicated, and there's a reason for that. On Tudor warships, especially Tudor warships, the whole designs were incredibly ornate, with lots and lots of paint applied to the ship's hull to make them look really fancy. And all of these decals go on the ship's hull to recreate the ornate effect on the side of the ship. I'll show you, can you see now? There are your transfers, and that's where they go on the ship. So there are quite a lot of these decals to apply, and I have looked online to see what some of the reviewers think, and some of the professional reviewers who review these kits professionally. And I do think that they have suggested that the decals they're a worthy application, and they're a very, very welcome inclusion in the kit, but they're not easy to fit. They take quite a lot of decal soft and decal set to make sure that they stay put. The bottom decals there, they fit onto the stand, and they ID the ship on the stand. The ship was built in 1511 and she sank in 1545. So she was only 34 years old when she sank. Interesting. Right, the parts. The parts come on 3 sprues, and compared with a lot of other kits, the first thing I noticed about a lot of the other Series 0 kits of the small sailing ship range, this ship is big. There's my hand, that's the parts. So you can see that this kit is actually going to be quite big. I'll take this out of the way so you can see these parts a bit better. This is the first sprue. The inside of the hull, there's not a lot really to write home about there, but there's the location slots for the gun deck that goes inside the ship. And that's a nice touch. One of the square rig sails there is featured there. You can see that it is slightly moulded with a rigging line section, and I might try and pick that out with maybe an HB pencil or maybe a wash or something, I'm not sure. But I'm not 100% satisfied with the sails on this kit. I think they look a little bit like they've been copied off pictures. And let's face it, a lot of the pictures and paintings of the period, they didn't put a lot of life in the sails. Now then, the ship's hull. I'm not going to show you both sides of it. I'm not going to go through both sides of the hull, but I am going to go through one side of the hull, because I do want to say that this hull, compared with older moulds, is really, really well detailed. You can see the guns coming through the gun ports there on the shelter deck, and the apertures for the gun deck below. And there is a runner there at the side. These were never visible on the earlier releases, the ships that came out in the 50s and the 60s. They were never visible at all, and the detail on this kit is absolutely fantastic. Although I would suggest that when you applied the decals to this kit, I would paint the kit in a gloss colour and trim the decals right down to their bare edge, to ensure that they fit into those recess lugs in the forecastle there and to the back of the ship, because they are actually flat. So they should accept the decal quite well. But I would definitely trim them down and paint the kit. You could even put a gloss finish varnish onto the kit prior to putting the decals in place. But that's the hull. The hull is really nicely detailed. I'm very impressed with that. Very impressed indeed. The second sprue, you can see the gun deck there. The gun deck, you're not going to see an awful lot of that through the apertures, because you're only going to be able to see any of that through the apertures that the guns are poking through already. The stand is quite nicely moulded. There's a couple of anchors there at one end. That's quite a nice touch. And also there's the detailing bits and bobs and some of the crow's nests there that go on the masts. And then I want to bring your attention to the actual ship's main deck. And this is where the ship is, in my opinion, will probably paint up really nice, because I think you're going to need 2 or 3 different colour paints on that deck to bring it out the way it should be. This ship's deck is completely covered in anti-boarding netting or cages, and you'll need to paint the recesses of this deck before you bring out the netting detail on the top, and I think that will come up really, really nice. But the actual the moulding and the craft work is really nice. A lot of the modelers who reviewed this kit when it first came out, they suggested that the deck was a little bit heavy-handed and it might need sanding down, but I disagree. I would say that you'd need to paint the kit's deck first and then bring out the netting in a lighter colour, and I think that will look fantastic. There's something else I want to show you about the ship's hull. The ship's hull has an anchor which is embossed into the forward part of the bow there, which is beautifully moulded and applied to the front of the ship there, but you're going to need a bit of care to paint that up, but I think it will look quite nice when it's done. So that's sprue 1 and 2. Sprue 3 is basically the mast, the rudder, and the rest of the sails. And here's the bit I wanted to bring your attention to. This bit here. This bit here is the stern of the ship. Now I can't remember what it's called, but it has a proper name. I'm sure somebody in the comments is going to leave and tell me what it is that part of the ship is called, but that is the part that sits in the stern and fills up the aperture that the hull leaves in the stern. And you can see here the forwards, the middle square rig pattern on this kit. It does look a little bit like it's moulded on paintings, but it is bowed, it is bellowing slightly, isn't it? So, you know, if you paint that up and, you know, pick out those lines inside that actually are being held in by the rigging, I think it'll look quite nice. That's the stand support in the middle, and these are the 2 tacking sails, and they look quite nice as well. I had mixed feelings about this. You know, I think it's going to be a bit of mixed blessings, but we'll see how they come out. And there's all the masts. They're quite nicely detailed and finished as well, and the rudder is really nice. The quality of the craft work in this kit is absolutely leaps and bounds beyond what any of their previous release small-scale sailing ships have ever achieved. Even, I mean, what I consider to be the reasonable one, the Victory, its detailing and craft work is absolutely nothing compared with what you've got in the Mary Rose box. Now then, that's the review of what's in the box over. I just want to go through the kit's technical gump so that we can close this video off. And then I'll go through the other options that are available that I didn't want to cover in pictorial form. But basically, the kit is the Airfix Mary Rose, release date 2014, and its serial number is 055114. It's moulded in 1/400 scale, and the model's dimensions will be somewhere in between 6 1/4 inches long, 2 3/4 inches wide, and 5 1/4 inches high, 6 inches on its stand. The kit comprises 29 parts on 3 grey plastic sprues, and it comprises decals for the ornate decor on the ship's hull under flag sheet. The options and costs are quite interesting. The Airfix Mary Rose I have seen go second hand on eBay for as little as £3.20, but its usual selling price is about £7 to £8. But it is available in the Mary Rose Trust shop for £9.99. The Airfix Santa Maria, which I've included on here because of its importance as a Carrack in model form. It was one of the first Carrack releases, and it's a half decent kit, although it's quite small. The Airfix Santa Maria goes for between £5 and £40 depending on the age and condition of the model. If you can get a really good condition bag kit for £40, you're doing quite well. The Hella Legrand Hermine retails for between £30 and £50. The Pyro Caterina du Monte Sinai, which is also a Lindbergh kit, retails for between £17 and £30. The Pyro Henri Grace, which is also a Lindbergh kit, retails for £15 to £30. And the Pyro Spanish Galleon Emperor Charles V retails for between £8 and £22. That ship is also a Lindbergh kit. The Pyro Venetian Carrack is between £10 and £22, again another Lindbergh kit. And the Revell Santa Maria retails for, I've seen it go as little as £2, although its usual price is about a tenner, but I have seen also sell for £30, again depending on the release, age of the kit and the condition. And the Zvezda San Gabriel retails for between £22 and £31. The Santa Maria is probably the most available Carrack in model form and is covered by Airfix, Hella, Mr. Craft, SMER and Zvezda. Zvezda, SMER and Mr. Craft are actually the Hella moulds. Pyro, who also produce the Aoshima, who produces the Lindbergh kits, as do Aoshima, Ertel and IMAI, and also the Revell kit of the Santa Maria that's also available. Now then, conclusions. There are many Carrack options available, but only one model of the Mary Rose. But here's the thing. The Mary Rose is the only model which has solid development sources, as the wreck is above water and it's easily measured, making the Airfix Mary Rose kit probably the most accurate. It has really nice detail and texture to the parts, but the sails have the appearance of being based on paintings and they look decidedly odd. But it should be an enjoyable build and a leap forward for Airfix when compared to the earlier offerings. I am looking forward to this build. I think, as I said before, I have had a dabble in a couple of their sailing ships. I've even built one of their large-scale sailing ships quite a while ago, which was the Endeavour bark, and I thoroughly enjoyed building it. It was a pleasure. I've also built the Airfix Victory, and I put calico sails on that ship. And that was for somebody who wanted me to build him a kit of the Victory, because he lived in Portsmouth next door, but he didn't just want an ordinary kit. So I built that kit as well, and I found the Airfix Victory a bit of a handful until the hull was put together, and then it went together like a dream. Although the mast locating pins in the mast were an incredibly tight fit, and I actually had to bore the holes out in the deck slightly to get them to go in. But the Airfix Victory is actually quite a detailed kit, but I actually think the Revell kit is slightly more accurate, but apparently it's a right pain to build. But I don't really want to go into the delvings of the other ships. But what I do want to state is I think the Airfix Mary Rose is a lovely looking, really well crafted kit with lots of decals to enhance her appearance, and I think it should paint up really nice. So I'm looking forward to this build. But time will tell what the outcome will be and the result of the Airfix mouldings on the sails. I am a bit dubious about how they're going to come out. So that's the inbox review on the Mary Rose. I hope this video has been of some use, and I hope all of your modelling projects are going smoothly. So until the next one, lads, I'll see you again. Bye for now.